Blind date cancelled. Billionaire discovers. Obese girl crying alone at parking lot. Blind date cancelled. Billionaire discovers. Obese girl crying alone at parking lot. The soft glow of crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the elegant restaurant interior as Alexander adjusted his silk tie for the third time in 10 minutes. The gentle clink of fine china and muted conversations created a sophisticated ambiance at La Maison, one of the city's most exclusive dining establishments. Alexander's fingers drummed against the crisp white tablecloth as his eyes drifted to the ornate clock mounted on the wall. 7:02 p.m. He had arrived early, not wanting to risk making a poor first impression. The matchmaking agency had assured him that Emily was punctual and professional, traits he valued highly. A waiter approached with practiced grace, crystal water pitcher in hand. "Would sir like a refill while waiting?" he asked, noting Alexander's half-empty glass. "Yes, thank you," Alexander replied, offering a polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As the waiter topped off his water, Alexander found himself studying the other diners. Couples leaned close across intimate tables, sharing quiet conversations and lingering glances. The sight stirred an unexpected ache in his chest. He checked his reflection in the polished silverware, running a hand through his dark hair. The matchmaker had been enthusiastic about this pairing, insisting that Emily's intelligence and warm personality would complement his driven nature. After his last relationship had ended so disastrously, Alexander had been hesitant to try dating again. But something about Emily's profile had intrigued him. 7:08 p.m. Alexander pulled out his phone, checking for messages. The screen showed nothing but his usual work notifications. He opened his email, scanning through the confirmation from the matchmaking service one more time. Yes, definitely 7 p.m. at La Maison. He hadn't gotten the details wrong. The maitre d' approached with another couple, seating them at a nearby table. The woman's laugh floated across the space, light and carefree. Alexander felt a twinge of envy at their easy companionship. At 34, he had achieved more professional success than most people did in a lifetime, but personal connections remained elusive. 7:15 p.m. His fingers tapped against his water glass, creating tiny ripples across the surface. The waiter hovered nearby, clearly wondering if he should offer a menu. Alexander gave a small shake of his head, not ready to admit defeat just yet. Perhaps there was traffic. Maybe she was having trouble finding parking in the crowded downtown area. He thought about the brief profile the agency had shared. Emily, 28, writer and artist. The description had painted a picture of someone creative and passionate about her work. Someone who might understand his own drive for excellence, but balance it with a softer perspective on life. 7:23 p.m. The knot in his stomach tightened as he checked his phone again. Still no messages. His mind began cycling through possibilities. Had there been some kind of emergency? Was she lost? Or had she simply changed her mind? The thought sent an uncomfortable chill down his spine. The gentle murmur of conversation around him seemed to grow louder, more intrusive. A couple at the next table received their appetizers, the aroma of fresh herbs and warm bread making Alexander realize how hungry he'd become. He'd been too nervous to eat lunch, anticipating this dinner. 7:30 p.m. Alexander loosened his tie slightly, feeling the weight of disappointed stares from nearby diners. The waitstaff had stopped approaching his table, their pitying glances telling him what he was beginning to suspect himself. His fingers hovered over his phone, debating whether to call the agency. But pride held him back. He didn't want to appear desperate or demanding. The minutes crawled by with excruciating slowness. Each time the restaurant door opened, his head lifted hopefully, only to sink again as another stranger walked past his table. The ice in his water had long since melted, the glass sweating in the warm restaurant air. 7:45 p.m. Alexander checked his phone one final time, the screen reflecting his tightened jaw and darkening expression. The evening he had approached with such cautious optimism was crumbling into yet another disappointment. Something was definitely wrong, and the sinking feeling in his chest told him this wasn't just a simple delay. The elegant dining room of La Maison had grown uncomfortably familiar to Alexander over the past hour. Every crystal chandelier, every piece of artwork on the burgundy walls, every perfectly pressed white tablecloth now seemed to mock his solitude. He shifted in his chair, the leather seat no longer feeling as comfortable as it had when he'd first arrived with such high hopes. "Sir, perhaps you'd like to see the menu now?" The waiter asked for the third time, his professional demeanor barely masking his sympathy. The same waiter who had been so attentive earlier now approached with visible hesitation. "Just a few more minutes," Alexander replied, his voice tight. He couldn't bring himself to order, still clinging to the possibility that Emily might appear with a reasonable explanation for her tardiness. The ice in his water had melted long ago, leaving the glass sweating onto the pristine tablecloth. A young couple at the next table exchanged whispers and glances in his direction. Alexander pretended not to notice, but their poorly concealed pity made his collar feel too tight. He loosened his tie slightly, wondering when exactly this evening had transformed from an exciting prospect into an exercise in humiliation. The maitre d' approached his table, moving with careful precision. "Mr. Alexander, is everything all right? Would you prefer to move to the bar area while you wait?" "No, thank you," Alexander responded, his words clipped. The suggestion felt like an admission of defeat, as if moving to the bar would officially transform him from an anticipated dinner guest to a stood-up patron drowning his sorrows. His phone lay face up on the table, its screen stubbornly dark. Alexander had checked it countless times, each glance revealing nothing but the usual work emails and market updates. No messages from Emily, no explanations, no apologies. The matchmaking agency had assured him of her reliability, had praised her professionalism. What had gone wrong? The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. The clink of wine glasses, the soft laughter from other tables, the subtle scrape of expensive china. It all grated against his nerves. He found himself envying the easy companionship of the other diners, their conversations flowing naturally, their evenings unfolding as planned. A server walked past with a tray of appetizers, the aroma of truffle and fresh herbs making Alexander's stomach growl. He hadn't eaten lunch, too nervous about the evening ahead. Now that nervousness had curdled into a mixture of hunger and frustration that sat heavily in his chest. 8:15 p.m. The clock on the wall seemed to mock him with its steady progression. Alexander ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, no longer caring if he maintained the perfect appearance he'd worked so hard to achieve earlier. The excitement he'd felt while choosing his best suit and tie now seemed foolish, naive even. His thoughts drifted to the agency's description of Emily. Creative, intelligent, passionate about her work. The profile had painted a picture of someone who might understand his own drive for excellence while bringing a different perspective to his life. Now he wondered if any of it had been real. Just as Alexander considered finally admitting defeat and asking for the check, his phone buzzed against the tablecloth. His heart jumped, but the hope died quickly as he saw the sender, the matchmaking agency's number, not Emily's. The message was brief and professional. "Dear Mr. Alexander, we regret to inform you that your date, Emily, has had to cancel this evening due to personal reasons. We sincerely apologize for the late notice and any inconvenience caused. We will be in touch tomorrow to discuss rescheduling options. Alexander stared at the words until they blurred together. Personal reasons. The vagueness of the excuse felt like salt in the wound. After an hour of waiting, after all the anticipation and preparation, this was all he got. A second-hand message with no real explanation. He placed his phone face down on the table, the gentle thud feeling oddly final. The waiter approached again, reading the shift in Alexander's demeanor. This time, when he asked if Sir would like the check, Alexander simply nodded, his earlier polite smiles nowhere to be found. Emily's hands trembled as she reached for the rear-view mirror, adjusting it to examine her tear-streaked face. The makeup she'd spent an hour perfecting now left dark tracks down her cheeks. In the harsh fluorescent lighting of the restaurant's parking lot, every imperfection seemed magnified. The slight double chin she tried so hard to hide, the roundness of her face that no amount of contouring could fully disguise. "You're such an idiot," she whispered to her reflection, fumbling in her purse for a tissue. The designer bag had been a splurge, something to boost her confidence for tonight. Now it felt like just another mistake, another attempt to pretend she could fit into Alexander's world. The tissue came away black with mascara. Emily had chosen waterproof makeup, but apparently even that hadn't been enough to withstand her breakdown. She'd spent nearly $200 at the makeup counter, letting the saleswoman convince her that the right products could transform her. But looking at herself now, all she saw was the same insecure woman who'd never quite managed to lose those extra pounds, who still heard her mother's voice criticizing her food choices at every meal. The dress she'd chosen stretched across her curves, the material pulling slightly at the seams despite being 2 sizes larger than what she usually wore. It was beautiful. A deep navy blue that the boutique owner had assured her was slimming. Emily ran her hands over the fabric, remembering how hopeful she'd felt during the fitting. For a brief moment, she'd actually believed she could pull this off. Her phone buzzed again, another message from the matchmaking agency. She couldn't bring herself to read it. They'd been so enthusiastic about matching her with Alexander, showing her his profile with its impressive credentials and carefully curated photos. CEO of a tech company, philanthropist, fitness enthusiast. Each detail had only reinforced what she already knew. He was completely out of her league. The restaurant's entrance glowed warmly in the distance, promising an evening of fine dining and sophisticated conversation. Emily imagined Alexander sitting at a table inside, probably checking his watch and wondering why his date hadn't shown up. Would he be relieved when he realized she wasn't coming? Would he thank his lucky stars for dodging what surely would have been an awkward evening? She dabbed at her eyes again, trying to salvage what remained of her makeup. The clock on her dashboard showed 8:15 p.m. She'd been sitting here for over an hour, paralyzed by her own fears. The rational part of her brain knew she should just drive home, crawl into bed, and pretend this evening had never happened. But something kept her rooted to the spot, perhaps the last remnants of hope that she'd find the courage she'd been looking for all her life. Emily reached into her purse again, this time pulling out the small notebook she always carried. Writing had always been her escape, her way of making sense of the world. But tonight, the pages offered no comfort. How could she possibly capture this feeling in words, this mixture of self-loathing and desperate longing for something different? The parking lot had grown quieter as the evening wore on. A few cars pulled in and out, carrying happy couples and families to their dinner reservations. Emily watched them through watery eyes, wondering what it would be like to move through the world with such confidence, to simply exist without constantly questioning whether you deserved to take up space. With trembling fingers, she pulled down the visor mirror one last time, attempting to fix what the tears had ruined. Her mother's words echoed in her head. "If you'd just lose some weight, dear, You could be so pretty." 20 years later, and those words still had the power to cut deep. Taking a deep breath, Emily gathered her purse and reached for the door handle. She couldn't sit here forever, hiding from the world in her car. Even if she couldn't face Alexander, she at least needed to leave this parking lot with whatever dignity she had left. Her heels clicked against the pavement as she stepped out, each step feeling like a small battle against the voice in her head that told her she didn't deserve love, that she would always be too much and somehow not enough at the same time. Alexander sat at his window table, absently swirling the remains of his second glass of wine. The restaurant's soft lighting cast gentle shadows across the crisp white tablecloth, now slightly rumpled from his hour-long wait. He'd been ready to leave, his pride wounded and his evening wasted, when movement in the parking lot caught his eye. A woman in a navy blue dress emerged from a car, her movements hesitant and uncertain. Even from this distance, he could see she'd been crying. There was something in the way she carried herself, shoulders curved inward, as if trying to make herself smaller. The sight stirred something in him, a recognition of pain he knew all too well. He watched as she took a few steps toward the restaurant, then paused, clutching her designer purse like a shield. The parking lot lights illuminated her face just enough for him to see her red-rimmed eyes and smudged makeup. Something about her seemed familiar, though he couldn't quite place it. Pushing back from the table, Alexander left a generous tip and made his way outside. The evening air had grown cooler, carrying the scent of approaching rain. The woman had stopped near a row of carefully maintained hedges, her gaze fixed on the ground as if she were gathering courage for something. As he approached, Alexander noticed more details: the careful way her hair had been styled, now slightly mussed, the elegant cut of her dress that spoke of careful selection, the trembling of her hands as she wiped at her eyes. She hadn't noticed him yet, lost in whatever thoughts were causing her such distress. "Excuse me," he said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Are you all right?" The woman's head snapped up, her eyes widening with recognition and something else. Fear? Embarrassment? She took a small step backward, her hand tightening on her purse. "I'm fine," she said quickly, but her voice wavered. "I was just leaving." Alexander kept his distance, sensing her discomfort. He'd learned to read people well over the years. It was part of what made him successful in business. Right now, everything about this woman's body language screamed vulnerability. "I couldn't help but notice you seemed upset," he continued gently. "I'm Alexander, by the way. I was actually waiting for someone inside, but—" He let the sentence trail off, offering a small, self-deprecating smile. The woman's face flushed, and she looked down at her feet. "I'm Emily," she whispered, so quietly he almost missed it. Alexander's eyebrows rose slightly. Emily. The name of his blind date. Could this be? Understanding began to dawn, pieces falling into place. "Emily?" he repeated carefully. Were you supposed to meet someone tonight?" She nodded miserably, still not meeting his eyes. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice thick with emotion. I just couldn't go through with it. You must think I'm terrible." "I don't think you're terrible at all," Alexander said, his voice gentle but firm. "Would you like to tell me why?" Emily finally looked up at him, her eyes swimming with tears. "Because look at me," she gestured helplessly at herself. I'm not what someone like you would expect. I couldn't bear to see the disappointment on your face when you saw me, so I canceled. I thought it would be easier that way." The vulnerability in her voice struck a chord in Alexander's heart. He recognized that tone, the sound of someone who'd been judged too harshly, too often. He'd heard it in his own voice not so long ago, after his ex had spent years chipping away at his self-worth. "Emily," he said softly, "would you like to talk about it? There's a coffee shop just around the corner. No pressure, no expectations. Just conversation." Emily hesitated, her fingers nervously playing with the strap of her purse as she considered Alexander's invitation. The coffee shop's warm lights beckoned through the growing darkness, promising a safe haven from the cool evening air. After a moment, she nodded, and they walked together in silence, the click of her heels on the pavement marking each step. Inside, they found a quiet corner booth away from other patrons. The coffee shop's ambient music and gentle chatter created a cocoon of privacy around them. Emily wrapped her hands around a steaming mug of chamomile tea, drawing comfort from its warmth. "I feel so foolish," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "When the matchmaking agency showed me your profile, I thought there had to be some mistake." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Someone like you, successful, accomplished, handsome, you could have anyone. And I'm—" She gestured at herself, pain evident in her expression. Alexander leaned forward slightly, his eyes kind. "Someone like me?" "Look at you," Emily said, a touch of frustration coloring her voice. "You're everything society says is perfect, and I'm not exactly what magazines put on their covers." She tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "I've spent my whole life being told I need to be smaller, to take up less space, that I need to fit into some arbitrary standard of beauty to be worthy of love." Her fingers tightened around the mug. "I got all dressed up tonight, did my hair, my makeup. I even bought this new dress. But sitting there in my car, looking at the restaurant, all I could think about was how disappointed you'd be when you saw me, how you'd probably make some polite excuse and leave early. It was easier to just not show up." Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she blinked them away furiously. "I know it was cowardly. I know I should have at least had the courage to face you. But I've been rejected so many times, been made to feel so worthless." Her voice cracked. "I couldn't bear to see that look of disappointment one more time." Alexander listened intently, his heart aching at the raw pain in her voice. He recognized the shame in her eyes, the way she seemed to want to fold in on herself and disappear. It reminded him too much of how he'd felt in the final months of his last relationship. "Emily," he said softly, "I understand more than you might think." He took a deep breath, fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. "My last relationship, it wasn't good. She was beautiful by conventional standards, but she wielded that beauty like a weapon." He swallowed hard, memories flooding back. "For 3 years, she constantly reminded me that despite my success, despite everything I'd built, I wasn't enough. She'd compare me to other men, point out my flaws, make subtle comments about how I should be grateful she was with me." His voice grew quieter. "She'd build me up in public, play the perfect girlfriend, but in private, she'd tear me down piece by piece, make me question my worth, my decisions, even my sanity sometimes. It was like death by 1,000 cuts." Emily's eyes widened with understanding and empathy. Alexander continued, "I may look successful and put together on the outside, but inside, I'm still healing from those wounds, still learning to trust myself again, to believe that I deserve genuine love." He met Emily's gaze directly. "So, when you talk about feeling unworthy, about being afraid of rejection, I get it, I really do. The packaging might be different, but the pain is the same." Emily's hands trembled slightly as she set down her mug. "I never thought. You seem so confident, so sure of yourself." "That's what everyone sees," Alexander said with a sad smile. "That's what I want them to see. But underneath, I'm just as scared of being hurt again as you are. The difference is I'm learning that real connections, genuine, honest ones, they start with vulnerability, like what you just shared with me." The soft glow of the coffee shop's lights cast gentle shadows across Alexander's face as he leaned back in his seat, his fingers absently tracing the rim of his untouched coffee cup. The evening crowd had thinned, leaving them in a bubble of privacy that made it easier to let the walls down. "Sarah," he said, speaking his ex's name for the first time in months. She was brilliant at making everything seem perfect on the surface. At galas and business functions, she'd hang on my arm, laugh at all the right moments, charm everyone in the room. He paused, a bitter smile touching his lips. But the moment we were alone, it was like a switch would flip. Emily watched him intently, recognizing the pain that flickered across his features. Her own insecurities momentarily forgotten as she witnessed his vulnerability. "It started small," Alexander continued, his voice dropping lower. "Comments about my clothes, suggestions about how I could improve my appearance. She'd say things like, 'You're so lucky I understand you,' or 'Most women wouldn't put up with your flaws.' I started second-guessing everything about myself." He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing its perfect styling. "Before I knew it, I was walking on eggshells. Every decision, every word, every action, I'd analyze it all, trying to predict what would trigger her next criticism. She had this way of making me feel like I was constantly failing some test I didn't even know I was taking." Emily reached across the table, hesitating for a moment before gently touching his hand. "That must have been exhausting," she said softly. Alexander nodded, looking down at their hands. "It was. The worst part was how she'd use my success against me. She'd say things like, 'Sure, you have money, but that's all you have going for you,' or 'Any woman who shows interest in you is just after your wealth.' Eventually, I started believing her." The coffee shop's quiet jazz music filled the silence as Alexander gathered his thoughts. "The final straw came at my sister's wedding. Sarah had too much to drink and started telling everyone how she was settling for me, how she was doing me a favor by staying. My sister found me later that night, sitting alone in the garden, and she said something I'll never forget. 'The only person settling here is you.'" Emily squeezed his hand gently, her eyes reflecting understanding rather than pity. "It takes incredible strength to walk away from something like that." "It took me 3 more months after that night," Alexander admitted. "Even then, I kept thinking maybe I could fix things. Maybe if I just tried harder." He shook his head. "The day I finally ended it, she laughed. Actually laughed. Said I'd never find anyone who would love me like she did. And the scary part is, for a long time, I believed her." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, both processing the weight of his confession. Finally, Alexander suggested they get some fresh air. They walked to the parking lot where the night had grown cooler. Stars peeked through breaks in the clouds above them, and the distant sound of traffic created a gentle backdrop to their thoughts. "You know what's ironic?" Alexander said, breaking the silence. "I came here tonight thinking I was ready to date again, but terrified of making the same mistakes. And instead of meeting someone who might hurt me again, I met someone who understands what it feels like to be afraid of not being enough." Emily wrapped her arms around herself, both from the cold and the emotion of the moment. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" she said softly. "Both so scared of being rejected that we almost missed meeting each other at all." They stood there in the parking lot, the night air crisp around them, but something warm and understanding had bloomed between them. It wasn't the elegant dinner date either had expected, but somehow this raw, honest exchange felt more meaningful than any carefully planned evening could have been. A deep silence fell between them, but it wasn't the uncomfortable kind that needed to be filled. It was the kind of silence that comes when two people recognize themselves in each other's struggles, when walls come down and understanding takes root. Emily shifted in her seat, her fingers idly tracing the rim of her now empty coffee cup. "You know, before all this, before tonight, I had these big plans for myself," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "I was going to write a book." Alexander leaned forward, genuinely interested. What kind of book? Children's books, actually. Her eyes lit up for the first time that evening. Stories about a little girl who learns to love herself, who goes on adventures and discovers her own strength. I have dozens of sketches at home. She trailed off, then laughed softly. It sounds silly now that I say it out loud. It doesn't sound silly at all, Alexander replied earnestly. What stopped you? Emily's smile turned wistful. Fear, mostly. I kept thinking, who would want to take advice about self-love from someone who can barely look in the mirror? But lately, I've been thinking maybe that's exactly why I should write it. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. The best stories often come from our own struggles. Look at us. We're both successful in our own ways, but we let other people's opinions hold us back. He chuckled, running a hand through his hair. I actually wanted to start a mentoring program for young entrepreneurs from disadvantaged backgrounds. Really? Emily's eyes widened with interest. What happened with that? Sarah, my ex, she said it would damage my image. Said no one would take me seriously if I spent time with those people. He made air quotes with his fingers, shaking his head. I believed her for a while. Emily leaned forward. And now? Now. A genuine smile spread across his face. Now I'm thinking maybe it's time to dust off those plans. Sometimes it takes hitting rock bottom to realize which way is up, right? They both laughed at that, the sound genuine and warming. Emily's shoulders relaxed for the first time that evening, the tension she'd been carrying starting to melt away. It's funny, she mused, how we let other people's voices become louder than our own. I spent so many years thinking I needed to shrink myself, literally and figuratively, to fit into someone else's idea of worthy. Alexander's expression grew serious. You know what I've learned tonight? Sometimes the people who seem to have it all together are just better at hiding their insecurities. And sometimes the strongest people are the ones who show up, even when everything in them is screaming to run away. Emily blushed slightly, looking down at her hands. I technically didn't show up, remember? I sat in my car crying instead. But you stayed, Alexander pointed out. You could have driven away when you saw me coming, but you didn't. That takes courage, Emily. Real courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being terrified and facing it anyway. The sincerity in his voice made Emily look up, meeting his gaze. There was no pity there, no judgment, just understanding and warmth. Thank you, she said softly, for making what could have been one of my most humiliating moments into something meaningful. Alexander smiled, pulling out his phone. I'd like to stay in touch, if that's okay. Maybe we could both use a friend who understands. Emily nodded, feeling a newfound lightness in her chest as they exchanged numbers. The night had started with tears of shame, but was ending with something that felt remarkably like hope. I mean it, Emily, Alexander said as they prepared to part ways. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. Don't let anyone, including yourself, tell you otherwise. They stood in the parking lot, the evening air now comfortable rather than cold, both knowing that while this wasn't the date they'd planned, it had given them something far more valuable. The beginning of healing. Alexander sat at his desk, staring at his phone for what felt like the 100th time that morning. 3 days had passed since that night in the parking lot, and Emily's number remained unused in his contacts. His thumb hovered over her name, but he pulled back, just as he had every other time. Mr. Sterling? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. Your 10 o'clock is here. Send them in, he replied, but his mind wasn't on the upcoming meeting. Instead, he remembered Emily's laugh, how it had started hesitantly, but grown more confident as the evening wore on. Throughout his meeting, Alexander found himself only half listening to the presentation. His thoughts kept drifting to Emily's story about her children's book dreams, wondering if she'd made any progress on those sketches she'd mentioned. He caught himself smiling at the memory of her enthusiasm when she'd talked about it. During lunch, he pulled out his phone again, composing and deleting multiple messages. "Hey, just thinking about you," seemed too forward. "Hope you're having a good day," felt too generic. Everything he typed seemed either too casual or too intense. Back at his apartment that evening, Alexander paced his living room, phone in hand. He walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city lights. The view had always helped him think clearly before, but tonight it just reminded him of how Emily had mentioned feeling small in a big world. "This is ridiculous," he muttered to himself, running a hand through his hair. "I'm a grown man who runs a billion-dollar company. I shouldn't be this nervous about sending a text." Meanwhile, across town, Emily sat cross-legged on her bed, surrounded by her old sketchbooks. She'd pulled them out after their conversation, but instead of feeling inspired, she felt a creeping doubt. Her fingers traced the outline of a character she'd drawn years ago, a little girl with a bright smile and wild, curly hair. "What am I doing?" she whispered to herself, closing the sketchbook. The warmth and understanding she'd felt with Alexander that night started to feel more like a dream than reality. She picked up her phone, checking it for what must have been the 20th time that day. No messages. Emily walked to her mirror, something she usually avoided. The woman who looked back at her seemed different from the one who'd had that heartfelt conversation in the parking lot. Her insecurities, momentarily quieted by Alexander's kindness, began whispering again. She remembered how he'd listened to her, really listened, without judgment. But now, in the harsh light of day, she wondered if he'd just been being polite. After all, he was successful, wealthy, probably surrounded by beautiful women all the time. Why would he want to spend more time with someone like her? In his office, Alexander finally drafted a message he thought might work. "I really enjoyed our conversation the other night. Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" His finger hovered over the send button, but he hesitated. What if she'd only opened up to him because of the emotional moment? What if she regretted sharing so much with a stranger? Emily picked up one of her sketches again, this time of a butterfly emerging from its cocoon. She remembered telling Alexander about the symbolism, how she'd drawn it during a particularly difficult time in her life. He'd understood immediately, sharing his own story of transformation after his toxic relationship. But now, days later, that connection felt tenuous. Had she imagined the warmth in his eyes, the genuine interest in his questions? Maybe he was just being kind to someone he saw crying in a parking lot. The thought made her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She reached for her phone again, opening their brief text exchange from that night when they'd shared numbers. Her thumb hovered over the delete button, wondering if it would be better to just forget the whole thing happened. Sometimes meaningful moments were meant to stay just that. Moments. Alexander sat in his office, staring at his phone. The city lights twinkled outside his window, a reminder that another day was slipping away. With a deep breath, he typed out the message he'd been crafting in his mind for days. "Hi, Emily. I can't stop thinking about our conversation the other night. Would you like to meet for coffee sometime?" His thumb trembled over the send button. For a man who regularly closed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, this simple text message felt monumental. He pressed send before he could change his mind. Emily was curled up on her couch, sketching in her notebook when her phone buzzed. Her heart jumped when she saw Alexander's name. She read the message 3 times, each time feeling her pulse quicken. She pulled her blanket tighter around her shoulders, trying to quiet the voices of doubt in her head. The memory of their parking lot conversation felt both vivid and distant, like a dream she wasn't sure had actually happened. I'd like that, she typed back, then deleted it. Too eager? She tried again. That would be nice. Delete. After several attempts, she settled on. Coffee sounds good. When were you thinking? Alexander's response came quickly. How about tomorrow morning? There's a little cafe called The Daily Grind on Oak Street. Say 10 o'clock? Emily looked down at herself, wearing her comfortable old sweater and leggings. The thought of getting dressed up to meet Alexander in public made her stomach clench. But something about their previous conversation gave her courage. Tomorrow at 10 works for me, she replied before she could talk herself out of it. The next morning, Emily stood in front of her closet, anxiety building as she tried to find something appropriate to wear. She finally settled on a flowing burgundy sweater dress that made her feel both comfortable and presentable. At 9:45, she pulled into the cafe parking lot, her hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. Through the window, she could see Alexander already inside, dressed in a casual blue button-down shirt that made him look more approachable than his business suit from the other night. She checked her reflection one last time, took a deep breath, and stepped out of her car. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and Alexander looked up, his face brightening with a genuine smile. Emily, he stood up as she approached. I'm really glad you came. The cafe was warm and inviting, with the rich aroma of coffee and freshly baked pastries filling the air. Soft jazz played in the background, and morning sunlight filtered through the large windows. I wasn't sure, Emily started, then paused, fidgeting with her purse strap. I wasn't either, Alexander admitted, his honesty catching her off guard. Would you like some coffee? They make an amazing vanilla latte here. As they settled into their seats with their drinks, Emily noticed how Alexander had chosen a quiet corner booth, away from the morning crowd. The thoughtfulness of this small gesture helped her shoulders relax slightly. I hope I didn't interrupt your work schedule, Emily said, wrapping her hands around her warm mug. Alexander shook his head. I cleared my morning. I wanted to... He paused, choosing his words carefully. I wanted to continue our conversation from the other night, without the cold parking lot this time. A small laugh escaped Emily's lips, and she felt some of her nervousness melt away. It wasn't the most conventional meeting place, was it? But it was real, Alexander said softly. That's what mattered to me. The honesty in his voice made Emily look up from her coffee, meeting his eyes. There was that same warmth she remembered from their first encounter, no pretense or judgment. They began talking about their week, the conversation flowing more naturally with each passing minute. Emily found herself sharing stories about her art projects, and Alexander listened intently, asking questions that showed genuine interest. The morning sun continued to rise, casting a gentle glow through the cafe windows as they sat together. Two people slowly letting their guards down, one coffee sip at a time. The morning crowd at the Daily Grind had thinned out, leaving Emily and Alexander in their quiet corner. Their empty coffee cups sat forgotten on the table as their conversation deepened. I remember looking in the mirror every morning before school, Emily said, her fingers tracing patterns on the wooden table. I'd try on different outfits, hoping to find something that would make me disappear, I guess. My mom always said I just needed to lose weight, that everything would be better then. Alexander leaned forward, his brow furrowed. That must have been incredibly difficult to hear from your own mother. Emily nodded, swallowing hard. It shaped everything. Even now, when I achieve something at work or in my art, there's this voice in my head saying it doesn't matter because of how I look. But you kept creating art anyway, Alexander observed softly. That takes courage. Art was my escape. Nobody judges a painting based on what the artist looks like. She smiled faintly. What about you? What helped you through your difficult times? Alexander sat back, running a hand through his dark hair. Work, mostly. I threw myself into building my company after my relationship ended, but I realized I was just avoiding dealing with the real issues. Which were? Emily asked, genuine curiosity in her voice, learning to trust my own judgment again. My ex had this way of making everything seem like my fault. If I succeeded, it was because of her support. If I failed, it was because I didn't listen to her advice. He shook his head. It took me a long time to recognize that pattern. Emily's hand moved across the table, almost touching his before pulling back. That's a form of control, isn't it? Making someone doubt themselves? Exactly. Personal growth isn't just about achieving goals or making more money. It's about learning to trust yourself again. Alexander's eyes met hers. Like you, finding the courage to keep creating art despite what others said. A warm flush spread across Emily's cheeks. I never thought about it that way. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Emily. His voice was gentle but firm. Canceling our blind date? That wasn't weakness, it was self-protection. But then you stayed and talked to me anyway. That took real courage. Emily felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. No one had ever framed her actions in terms of strength before. I almost drove away when I saw you coming toward my car. I'm glad you didn't. Alexander smiled, a genuine warmth in his expression that made her heart flutter. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the cafe's soft music filling the air between them. Emily noticed how Alexander's presence felt both exciting and calming at the same time. We should probably head out, Alexander said eventually, glancing at his watch. I hate to end this, but I have a meeting at noon. Emily nodded, gathering her purse. As they stood up, Alexander helped her with her coat, his fingers brushing against her shoulders. The simple gesture sent a shiver down her spine. They walked toward the exit together, their steps falling into sync. Outside, the morning had warmed up, sunshine bathing the street in golden light. As they headed toward their cars, Alexander walked close beside her, their hands occasionally brushing against each other. Each accidental touch sent electricity through Emily's body. She could feel the warmth radiating from him, smell his subtle cologne. When their hands brushed again, neither pulled away immediately, both savoring the brief connection. Emily felt her heart racing, not from anxiety this time, but from something else entirely: attraction, possibility, hope. She glanced at Alexander and caught him looking at her with an expression that mirrored her own feelings, making her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't like any connection she'd felt before. It wasn't based on superficial compliments or forced conversation. It was real, raw, and completely unexpected. Emily sat at her desk, trying to focus on her work when her phone buzzed. Alexander's name appeared on the screen, making her heart skip a beat. They'd been texting regularly since their coffee date, but each message still gave her butterflies. I have something to ask you, his text read. Before she could respond, her phone rang with his call. Hello? Emily answered, her voice soft. Emily, Alexander's warm voice came through. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important? She glanced at her computer screen, where her half-finished work sat forgotten. No, not at all. Good. She could hear the smile in his voice. I'm hosting a charity event this Saturday evening at the Grand Hotel. It's for a children's art therapy program I've been supporting. I'd love for you to come as my guest. Emily's breath caught in her throat. The Grand Hotel was the most prestigious venue in the city. She'd walked past its gleaming doors countless times, but never imagined stepping inside. I don't know, Alexander. What's holding you back? His voice was gentle, understanding. Emily moved from her desk to the window, watching people pass by on the street below. These kinds of events, they're not really my scene. Everyone will be so... She struggled to find the right words. So what? Perfect, she whispered. Beautiful, sophisticated. I'll stick out like a sore thumb. There was a pause on the other end. When Alexander spoke again, his voice was firm, but kind. Emily, you're talking about external things. What I see when I look at you is someone passionate about art, someone who understands its healing power. That's exactly why I want you there. This program helps children express themselves through art when words fail them. Tears pricked at Emily's eyes. You really want me there? More than anyone else, he said without hesitation. And for what it's worth, I think you're beautiful. Emily's cheeks flushed. Alexander. Just think about it. No pressure. But I'd be honored to have you by my side. After they hung up, Emily paced her apartment, her mind racing. She found herself in front of her closet, pushing through hangers of clothes she'd bought to hide in, not to stand out. Nothing seemed right for such an elegant event. She pulled out a black dress she'd bought years ago, but never worn. The tags still hung from the sleeve. She'd purchased it during a moment of optimism, imagining a future where she'd feel confident enough to wear it. Emily slipped the dress on, stepping in front of her full-length mirror. The fabric hugged her curves instead of hiding them. Her hands smoothed down the material, trying to see herself through Alexander's eyes. You can do this, she whispered to her reflection, but doubt crept in immediately. What if Alexander's sophisticated friends judged her? What if she embarrassed him? She sat on the edge of her bed, the dress pooling around her. Her phone lit up with another message from Alexander. The children's artwork will be displayed at the event. I'd love to hear your perspective on their pieces. Emily smiled, despite her anxiety. He wasn't asking her to be arm candy or to fit some perfect mold. He wanted her there for who she was, her knowledge, her passion, her understanding of art as a form of expression. Standing again, she looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was still curvy, still not society's ideal, but maybe that wasn't the point. Maybe, just maybe, she deserved to take up space in Alexander's world exactly as she was. She picked up her phone and typed, "Yes, I'll come." Alexander's response was immediate. "You've made my day." Emily spent the next hour going through her closet again, this time with different eyes. Instead of looking for clothes to hide in, she searched for pieces that made her feel strong, elegant, worthy. Her hands trembled slightly as she laid out potential outfits on her bed, each one a small act of courage. The doubt was still there, whispering in the back of her mind, but something else was growing alongside it, a tiny spark of hope, of possibility, of belonging. Emily's hands trembled as she stepped out of the taxi in front of the Grand Hotel. The building towered above her, its marble columns and crystal chandeliers visible through the enormous windows. Well-dressed couples streamed through the golden revolving doors, the women in designer gowns and the men in perfectly tailored suits. She smoothed down her navy blue dress, the most expensive piece of clothing she owned. The fabric felt soft under her fingers, but her mind raced with doubts. A gentle touch on her elbow made her jump. "You came," Alexander said, his smile warming his entire face. He looked devastating in his black tuxedo, every inch the successful businessman she knew him to be. "And you look absolutely stunning." Emily blushed, ducking her head. "Thank you. You look very handsome yourself." He offered his arm, and she took it, grateful for the support as they walked through the doors. The grand ballroom took her breath away. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the crowd, and elaborate flower arrangements decorated every table. Beautiful artwork from the children's program lined the walls, bringing splashes of color and creativity to the elegant space. "Alexander!" A tall woman in a red dress waved them over. "We were wondering when you'd arrive." Emily's grip tightened on Alexander's arm as they approached a small group of people. They all looked like they belonged on magazine covers. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Emily," Alexander said, his voice filled with pride. "Emily, these are some of my closest friends. This is Sarah, my chief operating officer, and her husband, James." Sarah's smile seemed genuine as she shook Emily's hand. "So you're the one who's been making our Alexander smile so much lately." "And this is Michael, my chief financial officer," Alexander continued, "and his wife, Rebecca." Emily tried to remember their names, forcing herself to maintain eye contact despite her instinct to look away. To her surprise, they drew her into their conversation easily, asking about her work and her thoughts on art therapy. "The children's artwork is incredible," Rebecca said, gesturing to the walls. "Have you had a chance to look at them yet?" Emily shook her head. "Not yet, but I'm really looking forward to it." "Emily's quite knowledgeable about art," Alexander added. "She has some fascinating insights about how it can help with emotional expression." The group seemed genuinely interested as Emily explained her thoughts on art therapy and its benefits. She found herself relaxing as the conversation flowed naturally, her initial fears beginning to fade. Throughout the evening, Alexander stayed close, his hand occasionally finding the small of her back in a gesture of support. He introduced her to more people, always highlighting her interests and achievements, rather than just presenting her as his date. As the night progressed, Emily noticed something surprising. Nobody was staring at her size or giving her those judgmental looks she'd feared. Instead, people were listening to her ideas, laughing at her jokes, treating her like she belonged. During a brief lull in the festivities, Alexander led her to the balcony. The night air was cool and fresh, a welcome break from the warmth of the ballroom. The city lights sparkled below them like earthbound stars. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his voice soft. Emily turned to face him, surprised to find tears pricking at her eyes. "I am. More than I expected to." "What's wrong?" His brow furrowed with concern as he noticed her tears. "Nothing's wrong," she said, managing a watery smile. "It's just, for the first time in my life, I feel like people are seeing me. The real me, not just—" She gestured to her body. "Not just what I look like." Alexander reached out, gently wiping away a tear that had escaped. "That's how I've seen you from the beginning, Emily. You're brilliant, compassionate, and insightful. Everyone here tonight sees that too." She leaned against the balcony railing, looking out at the city. "Thank you for believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself. For the first time, I feel accepted, just as I am." Alexander sat at his desk, still riding high from the previous night's success. Emily had fit so naturally into his world, her genuine warmth and intelligence winning over everyone she met. He smiled, remembering how her eyes had sparkled when she talked about art therapy with his board members. His phone buzzed, interrupting his pleasant memories. The name on the screen made his stomach drop. Victoria. His ex's face appeared on the caller ID, a photo he'd forgotten to delete after their breakup 6 months ago. For a moment, he just stared at the screen, his thumb hovering over the decline button. Victoria had a way of getting under his skin, of making him question everything he thought he knew about himself. Their relationship had been intense, passionate, and ultimately toxic. With a deep breath, he answered. "Hello? Alex." Victoria's voice was soft, vulnerable, a tone she rarely used. "I've been thinking about us." Alexander leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Victoria, please just listen," she cut in. I've been in therapy, working on myself. I know I hurt you, and I'm truly sorry for everything I put you through." He closed his eyes, memories flooding back. The constant criticism, the way she'd tear him down only to build him back up again, the endless cycle of breaking up and making up. But there had been good times, too. Moments of connection that had made him believe they were meant for each other. "I'd like to meet," Victoria continued, "just to talk. I owe you a proper apology, and there are things I need to say face to face." Alexander's thoughts drifted to Emily. Sweet, genuine Emily, who wore her heart on her sleeve and never played games, who showed him what real connection felt like, without the drama and manipulation. "I don't think that's a good idea," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Remember that cafe near the park, where we had our first date?" Victoria's voice grew softer. "Just one coffee, one conversation. That's all I'm asking for." Alexander stood up, walking to his office window. The city stretched out below him, busy and bustling, while his mind was in turmoil. Part of him wanted closure, wanted to hear what Victoria had to say. Another part feared being pulled back into her orbit, losing sight of the peace he'd found since meeting Emily. "You don't have to decide right now," Victoria said, filling his silence. "But I'm leaving for London next month. This might be our last chance to really talk things through." He thought about Emily again, about her vulnerability in the parking lot that first night, about how she'd trusted him with her insecurities, how she'd shown him that real connection didn't need to hurt. "One coffee," he found himself saying, the words coming out before he could stop them. "That's all." "Thank you, Alex." The relief in Victoria's voice was palpable. "Tomorrow at 2? "Fine." He agreed, already feeling a knot forming in his stomach. "But Victoria, this is just closure, nothing more." After hanging up, Alexander sat heavily in his chair. The photo of last night's charity event was still open on his laptop, Emily beaming at the camera, her eyes bright with joy. He'd never seen her look so confident, so beautiful. He should tell her about meeting Victoria, he knew that. But the thought of causing her any anxiety, of seeing doubt cloud those trusting eyes, he couldn't bring himself to do it. It was just coffee, he reasoned. Just closure. His phone buzzed again, a text from Emily this time. "Thank you for last night. It meant more than I can say." Alexander stared at the message, guilt mingling with affection. He typed back a response about how wonderful she'd been, how proud he was to have her by his side. But as he hit send, Victoria's voice echoed in his mind, and he wondered if he was making a terrible mistake by agreeing to meet her. The rest of his workday passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but his mind kept circling back to tomorrow's meeting. One coffee with Victoria. One conversation to finally close that chapter of his life. He just hoped it wouldn't cost him the chance to write a new one with Emily. Alexander arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early, his stomach in knots. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries brought back memories he'd tried to forget. Lazy Sunday mornings, shared laughter, moments when everything felt perfect before it all fell apart. He chose a table by the window, the same one where he and Victoria had sat on their first date 2 years ago. The nostalgia hit him harder than expected, making him question everything. His hand trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous habit he thought he'd overcome. The bell above the door chimed, and there she was. Victoria walked in wearing a cream-colored dress that highlighted her elegant figure, her dark hair falling in perfect waves around her shoulders. She'd always known how to make an entrance. "Alex," she said softly, approaching the table. Her perfume, the same one she'd always worn, wafted around him as she leaned in to kiss his cheek. "Victoria." He gestured to the chair across from him, maintaining his composure despite the flutter in his chest. "You look well." Therapy agrees with me." She smiled, settling into her seat with the grace he remembered. "I've done a lot of work on myself these past months." The waiter appeared, and they ordered. An Americano for him, a vanilla latte for her, just like old times. "I want to apologize," Victoria began, her perfectly manicured fingers tracing patterns on the table. "I was toxic, manipulative. I took you for granted and pushed you away when all you did was try to love me." Alexander's throat tightened. He'd waited so long to hear these words, but now they stirred up emotions he wasn't prepared to face. "What changed?" "I did." She met his eyes, and he saw genuine remorse there. "After you left, I hit rock bottom. My therapist helped me see how my fear of vulnerability was destroying every relationship in my life. I've been working through my abandonment issues, learning to communicate without manipulation." Their drinks arrived, creating a brief pause in the conversation. Alexander stirred his coffee, buying time to process her words. "I'm proud of you," he said finally. "That couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't." Victoria reached across the table, her fingers brushing his hand. "But you were worth it. Are worth it. I know I have no right to ask, but I miss us, Alex. The real us, not the toxic version we became." Alexander felt the familiar pull, the magnetic attraction that had always existed between them. But now it was tinged with something else. Fear, perhaps, or wisdom gained through pain. "Victoria?" He withdrew his hand gently. "A lot has changed." "I know." She leaned back, vulnerability flickering across her features. "I heard you've been seeing someone. Emily, right?" The mention of Emily's name sent a jolt through him. Sweet, genuine Emily who'd never tried to manipulate him, who showed him what real emotional intimacy felt like. "It's new," he said carefully. "But yes." "Is it serious?" Victoria's voice held a note of resignation. Alexander hesitated. Was it serious? He and Emily hadn't put labels on anything yet, but their connection felt deeper than any he'd experienced before, even what he'd had with Victoria. "I don't know," he admitted, "but it's different. Good different." Victoria nodded slowly, blinking back tears. "I understand. I needed you to know how sorry I am, and that if you ever think there might be a chance for us again, I'm ready to do the work. Really do it this time." The sincerity in her voice shook him. This was the Victoria he'd fallen in love with. Vulnerable, real, without the walls and games. But was it too late? They finished their coffees in contemplative silence, both lost in memories and might-have-beens. When it was time to leave, Victoria stood and straightened her dress. "Thank you for meeting me," she said softly. "For letting me apologize." "Take care of yourself, Victoria." He meant it. Walking back to his car, Alexander felt unsettled. Victoria's transformation seemed genuine, and part of him wondered if he was giving up too easily on what they'd once had. But then he thought of Emily's smile, her honesty, the way she made him feel accepted without conditions. The question was, which path led to healing, and which led back to pain? He wasn't sure he knew the answer anymore. Emily stood in the hallway outside Alexander's office, clutching the lunch she'd brought to surprise him. Her hand froze mid-knock as she heard his voice through the door. "Victoria, I understand things are different now." Alexander's voice was soft, gentle in a way that made Emily's stomach twist. "Yes, I remember that place. Of course I do." Emily's hand dropped to her side, the paper bag crinkling. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her feet wouldn't move. "I can't just forget everything we shared," Alexander continued. 7 years is a long time." "No, I'm not saying that." Emily's chest tightened. 7 years. She'd known Alexander had been in a long-term relationship before, But hearing him speak about it made it real, made her feel small. "Look, I need time to think," Alexander said. "You can't just come back and expect— I know you're sorry, I hear that." Emily backed away from the door, her legs shaking. The fancy sandwich she'd picked up from his favorite deli suddenly felt silly and presumptuous. What was she doing here? Playing at being someone special in his life when he had history with someone else, someone who probably looked like she belonged in his world. She hurried toward the elevator, pressing the button repeatedly as if it would make it arrive faster. Behind her, she could still hear the muffled sound of Alexander's voice, though she couldn't make out the words anymore. The elevator dinged, and Emily practically fell inside, pressing the lobby button. As soon as the doors closed, she leaned against the wall, trying to steady her breathing. "You're being ridiculous," she whispered to herself, but the words felt hollow. All her insecurities came rushing back, every doubt about her size, her worth, her place in Alexander's life. Her phone buzzed. A text from Alexander. "Hey, are we still on for dinner tonight?" Emily stared at the message, her vision blurring with tears. She thought about the way he'd looked at her at the charity event, how special she'd felt. But now she wondered if she'd imagined it all. Maybe she'd been so desperate to believe someone like him could want someone like her that she'd seen what she wanted to see. Another text came through. "I miss you." The words that would normally make her heart soar now felt like thorns. How many times had he said those same words to Victoria over 7 years? How could her few weeks with him compare to that kind of history? Emily stepped out of the elevator into the lobby, finding a quiet corner to sit. She opened her phone to respond, then closed it again. What could she say? That she'd overheard him? That she was jealous of a relationship she knew nothing about? The sandwich bag sat heavily in her lap. She'd been so excited to surprise him, thinking about how his face would light up when she walked in. Now she felt foolish. Of course someone like Alexander would have options. Of course his ex would want him back. She pulled out her phone again and typed, "Something came up at work. Rain check?" It was a lie, but she needed space. Time to protect her heart before it got too invested. Before she got hurt worse than she already was. Alexander's response came quickly. "Everything okay?" No, everything wasn't okay. She was falling for him, and he was still tied to his past. To someone who probably fit better into his world than she ever could. "Just busy. Talk later," she typed, then turned off her notifications. Emily stood up, dropping the untouched lunch in a nearby trash can. She'd let herself dream too big, forget who she was. It was time to step back, to remember that fairy tales didn't happen to girls like her. As she walked out of the building into the bright afternoon sun, she wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold together the pieces of her heart that were already starting to crack. Alexander stared at his phone, reading Emily's messages from the past few days. Short replies, canceled plans, always too busy or not feeling well. Something had changed, but he couldn't pinpoint when or why. He paced his office, running a hand through his dark hair. The city skyline stretched out before him through floor-to-ceiling windows, but he barely noticed it. His mind kept replaying their last real conversation, searching for what might have gone wrong. "Sir?" His assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Your 3 o'clock is here." "Cancel it," he said, making a sudden decision. "Cancel everything for the rest of the day." He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. 20 minutes later, he stood outside Emily's workplace, a small publishing house where she worked as an editor. He'd only been here once before, when he'd surprised her with lunch last week. It felt like a lifetime ago. Through the glass doors, he saw her at her desk, head down, focused on her work. Even from here, He could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she kept pushing her hair behind her ear, a nervous habit he'd come to recognize. He stepped inside, nodding to the receptionist who recognized him. As he approached Emily's desk, she looked up, and for a moment he saw something flash across her face. Pain? Fear? Before she schooled her features into a polite mask. "Alexander," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "What are you doing here?" "I needed to see you," he said softly. "You've been distant. I'm worried." Emily glanced around, aware of curious eyes watching them. "This isn't really the place." "Then let's go somewhere else. Please, Emily, just talk to me." She hesitated, then nodded, gathering her purse. They walked in silence to a small park nearby, finding a quiet bench away from the lunch crowd. "What's going on?" Alexander asked, turning to face her. "Did I do something wrong?" Emily stared at her hands, twisting them in her lap. "No, you didn't do anything wrong. I think I need some space." "Space?" The word felt like a punch to his gut. "Why?" "I heard you," she said quietly. "On the phone with Victoria." Alexander's breath caught. "When?" "The other day. I came to surprise you with lunch and—" She shook her head. "It doesn't matter. I shouldn't have been listening." "Emily, whatever you heard—" "7 years," she cut him off. "You were with her for 7 years. And here I am, thinking a few weeks could somehow compare to that." "It's not about comparing, isn't it?" Emily finally looked at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She knows your world, Alexander. She fits into it. I'm just me." Alexander reached for her hand, but she pulled away, standing up. "I need to get back to work." "Emily, please, let me explain." "There's nothing to explain. You have history with her, and that's okay. I can't be here while you figure out what that means." He watched her walk away, her shoulders straight, but her steps hurried, like she was trying not to run. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Victoria again. But he ignored it. Back in her apartment that evening, Emily curled up on her couch, a cup of untouched tea growing cold on the coffee table. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from Alexander, but she couldn't bring herself to listen to his voicemails. She looked around her small apartment, with its mismatched furniture and second-hand bookshelf. Everything here screamed average, ordinary. How had she ever thought she could bridge the gap between her world and his? The memory of his conversation with Victoria played on repeat in her mind. The tenderness in his voice when he'd said her name, the way he'd acknowledged their shared past. Emily had never heard him speak like that about her. Maybe it was better to end things now, before she fell any deeper, before she truly believed in the possibility of them. Alexander deserved someone who could stand confidently beside him, not someone who questioned her worth every time she walked into a room. She picked up her phone, thumb hovering over Alexander's name. One text could end it all. One message to set him free to return to the life, and the woman he knew. Alexander stood outside Emily's apartment building, raindrops sliding down his collar. He'd been standing there for 10 minutes, gathering his courage. The security guard had recognized him from his previous visits and let him in. But now he faced a more formidable barrier. Emily's door. His hand hovered over the intercom button. The lights in her window were on. He could see the soft glow against the darkening sky. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the button. Silence. He pressed it again, longer this time. "Emily, please. I know you're home. I just want to talk." More silence. Then, finally, her voice crackled through the speaker, small and hesitant. "Alexander, I don't think this is a good idea." 5 minutes, he pleaded. That's all I'm asking for. If you still want me to leave after that, I will." He heard her sigh, followed by the buzz of the door lock releasing. His heart hammering, he took the stairs 2 at a time to her 3rd-floor apartment. When he reached her door, it was slightly ajar. Emily stood in her living room, arms crossed protectively over her chest. She wore oversized sweatpants and a baggy sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Her eyes were red-rimmed, and the sight made his chest ache. "You're wet," she said quietly. "It's raining." He remained in the entryway, water dripping onto her welcome mat. "Can I come in? Really come in?" She nodded, stepping aside. As he moved past her, he caught the faint scent of her lavender shampoo, and memories of holding her close flooded his mind. "Do you want a towel?" she asked, ever the gracious host despite her obvious discomfort. "No, I'm fine. Emily, we need to talk about what happened." "There's nothing to talk about." She moved to the kitchen, busying herself with making tea she probably didn't want. "You're working things out with Victoria. I understand." "No, you don't understand." He followed her, watching as she fumbled with the kettle. "I'm not working things out with Victoria. I met with her because I needed closure." Her hands stilled on the counter. "Closure?" "Yes. 7 years is a long time to just forget, but that doesn't mean I want to go back." He took a step closer. "The person I want to be with is right here." Emily turned around slowly, her eyes searching his face. "But I heard you on the phone. You sounded so different with her." "Different how?" "Intimate. Like you shared something I could never understand." Alexander ran a hand through his damp hair. "Victoria and I share history, yes. Some of it good, some of it terrible. But that's all it is. History. Then why meet with her at all?" He moved to the kitchen table, pulling out a chair. "Can we sit, please?" Emily hesitated, then joined him, keeping the table between them like a shield. "I met with Victoria because I needed to know for sure," he said softly. "I needed to look her in the eye and know that what I felt for her was truly over. Because what I'm feeling for you—" He paused, searching for the right words. "It scares me, Emily. It's different from anything I've ever felt before." She looked down at her hands. "Different doesn't always mean better. In this case, it does." He leaned forward. "With Victoria, everything was about appearances, about fitting into each other's worlds. But with you, I can just be me. The real me, not the billionaire businessman everyone expects me to be. Alexander," her voice wavered. "I know I've handled this badly," he continued. "I should have been honest about meeting Victoria. I should have explained why I needed to do it. But I was afraid of losing what we were building, afraid of hurting you, afraid of my own feelings." A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. "I'm afraid too," she whispered. "Every time I'm with you, I keep waiting for you to realize I don't belong in your world." "My world is wherever you are," he said firmly. "The rest is just scenery." The silence stretched between them in Emily's small kitchen, broken only by the soft patter of rain against the windows. Alexander reached across the table, his hand hovering near hers but not quite touching. "I've been such an idiot," he said softly. "I spent so much time worried about doing the right thing that I ended up doing exactly the wrong thing." Emily's fingers twitched, but she kept them clasped tightly in her lap. "You hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "I know." Alexander's face crumpled with regret. "When Victoria called, I thought I needed to give her a chance to explain, to apologize. I thought it would help me move forward. But sitting there with her, listening to her talk about how different things would be this time." He shook his head. "All I could think about was you." Emily looked up, meeting his gaze. Me? Yes. You. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. I kept thinking about how you laugh at my terrible jokes, how you see right through my corporate facade, how you make me feel more like myself than I've felt in years. Victoria was talking about changing, but you've never asked me to be anything other than who I am. A tear slipped down Emily's cheek. She quickly wiped it away, but Alexander had already seen it. He stood up and moved around the table, kneeling beside her chair. Victoria and we were together because it made sense on paper. Two ambitious people from similar backgrounds, with similar goals. But there was never any real connection, no genuine understanding. He tentatively reached for her hand, and this time she let him take it. What you and I have, even in these few short weeks, is more real than anything I had with her in 7 years. Emily's fingers trembled in his. How can you be so sure? Because with Victoria, I always felt like I was performing, being the successful businessman, the perfect partner, whatever role she needed me to play. But with you, he squeezed her hand gently. With you, I can just be Alexander, the man who gets nervous before blind dates, who still isn't sure if he's doing any of this right, who's terrified of messing up the best thing that's ever happened to him. A small smile tugged at Emily's lips, despite her tears. You're not messing up right now. Thank goodness for that, he said, returning her smile. Because I need you to understand something. Victoria isn't a threat to what we have. She's my past, a past I'm grateful to finally close the door on. You're the one I want to build a future with. Emily's breath caught. Alexander, I know it's scary, he continued, reaching up to brush away another tear from her cheek. I know you have your doubts and fears. I have them too. But what I feel for you, it's worth facing those fears for. Emily closed her eyes, leaning slightly into his touch. When she opened them again, they were filled with a mix of hope and uncertainty. I want to believe you, she said softly. But I'm so scared. Not just of you and Victoria, but of everything. Of not being enough, of getting hurt, of letting myself fall for someone who might decide I'm not worth the trouble. You are worth everything, Alexander said firmly. Every moment, every effort, every risk. And I'll spend as long as you'll let me proving that to you. Emily looked down at their joined hands, at his strong fingers intertwined with hers. I'm scared to let myself love again, she admitted in a whisper. The last time I opened my heart, I ended up more convinced than ever that I wasn't worthy of love. She took a deep breath, squeezing his hand. But something about you makes me want to try. Something about us makes me think maybe, just maybe, it's worth the risk. Alexander's eyes lit up with hope. Is that a yes to giving us another chance? It's a yes to trying, Emily said softly. To taking it one day at a time and seeing where it leads. Because as terrifying as this is, the thought of not trying at all scares me even more. Alexander paced across his office, phone pressed to his ear. Yes, that's right. I need the entire rooftop. No, not tomorrow. Tonight. He paused, looking out over the city skyline. I understand it's short notice, but price isn't an issue. After ending the call, he sank into his chair, running his fingers through his perfectly styled hair. The parking lot where he'd first met Emily wasn't exactly romantic, but the rooftop of the adjacent building offered a perfect view of where their story began. It felt right, coming full circle. Mr. Romano? His assistant Sarah poked her head in. The florist is online too. Thank you. He picked up the phone again. Yes, I need white roses, but not just roses. I want something that feels different, unique. He thought of Emily's warm smile, how it lit up her entire face. Add wildflowers, something colorful and natural. The next few hours passed in a blur of preparations. Alexander personally supervised the transformation of the rooftop. Workers strung thousands of tiny lights overhead, creating a canopy of artificial stars. Below, they arranged intimate seating areas with plush cushions and soft throws to ward off the evening chill. "The table goes there," he directed, pointing to the spot that would give them the best view of both the city and the parking lot below. "And make sure the heating lamps are positioned correctly. I don't want her to be cold." The caterer arrived next, setting up a mobile kitchen in the corner. Alexander had chosen Emily's favorite comfort foods but elevated them. Mac and cheese with truffle, gourmet sliders with Wagyu beef, and for dessert, a dark chocolate soufflé that would be prepared fresh. "Sir," the headwaiter approached, "where would you like the champagne station?" Alexander shook his head. "No champagne. Just her favorite wine. The Pinot Noir, I specified. And make sure there's hot chocolate with homemade marshmallows. She mentioned once that it reminds her of happy moments from her childhood." As sunset approached, Alexander checked every detail one last time. The flowers had arrived, an artistic arrangement of white roses mixed with wildflowers in varying shades of purple and blue. Candles flickered in hurricane glasses, protected from the light breeze. Soft music played from hidden speakers. In the center of the table sat a small, wrapped package. Inside was a journal, leather-bound and handmade. On the first page, he'd written every reason why he'd fallen for her. Her kindness, her strength, the way she saw through his walls, the way she made him want to be better. His phone buzzed, a text from the driver he'd sent to pick up Emily. "On our way." Alexander's heart raced. He straightened his tie for the 100th time, smoothed down his jacket. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The city lights were starting to twinkle below, matching the canopy of string lights above. "Everything's perfect," Sarah assured him, doing one final check. "Should I send her up when she arrives?" "No," Alexander said. "I'll meet her at the elevator." The minutes ticked by slowly. Alexander found himself walking to the edge of the rooftop, looking down at the parking lot where everything had changed, where he'd found Emily crying in her car, where they'd first opened up to each other. Who would have thought that a canceled blind date would lead to this moment? His phone buzzed again. "In the lobby." Alexander took a deep breath and headed for the elevator. His hands were shaking slightly. Him, who regularly closed million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. But this wasn't business. This was his heart, laid bare. The elevator dinged and the doors opened. Emily stepped out, looking stunning in a simple blue dress. Her eyes widened as she took in Alexander standing there, backlit by the sunset. "Alexander, what's going on?" He extended his hand to her, a soft smile on his face. "I have something to show you." He led her around the corner, where the transformed rooftop waited. Emily gasped as she took in the scene, the lights, the flowers, the intimate table set for two, all with the spectacular sunset as a backdrop. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand tightening in his. Tears welled up in her eyes as she recognized the view of the parking lot below. "Is this—" Alexander guided Emily to the intimate table, pulling out her chair. The city lights twinkled below them like earthbound stars, mirroring the string lights overhead. The soft music and flickering candles created an atmosphere that felt magical, separate from the rest of the world. "This is incredible," Emily said softly, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "I can't believe you did all this." "I wanted it to be special," Alexander replied, taking his seat across from her. "This place, it means something to us, even if our first meeting wasn't exactly conventional." Emily laughed, the sound warming his heart. "You mean finding me crying in my car wasn't your ideal first date?" It was better than any planned date could have been, he said seriously. Because it was real. You were real. The waiter appeared with their first course, and Emily's eyes lit up at the familiar comfort foods with an elegant twist. You remembered everything I like. As they ate, their conversation flowed naturally, touching on memories they'd shared over the past weeks. The tension that had built between them during Alexander's confusion over his ex melted away with each passing moment. I've been thinking a lot about the future, Alexander said, setting down his fork. About what I want, what really matters. Emily's hand stilled on her wine glass. And what have you concluded? That I spent too many years chasing what I thought I should want, success, status, the perfect relationship on paper. But sitting here with you. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I've never felt more certain about what I want. Emily's cheeks flushed, but she didn't pull away. And what is that? A life that's authentic, a connection that's real. He squeezed her hand gently. What about you? What do you dream about? Emily was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I want to stop being afraid, she finally said. I've spent so much time hiding, convinced I wasn't enough. But being with you, you make me feel brave. Like maybe I can be more than what I've allowed myself to be. You already are, Alexander said softly. You're the strongest person I know. After dinner, they moved to one of the comfortable seating areas. Emily curled up under a soft throw blanket, cradling a mug of hot chocolate topped with homemade marshmallows. Alexander sat close, their shoulders touching. Look, he pointed upward. You can actually see some stars tonight. Emily followed his gaze. It's beautiful. Everything about tonight is beautiful. I have something for you, Alexander said, reaching for the wrapped package. He handed it to her, suddenly nervous. Open it. Emily carefully unwrapped the leather-bound journal, running her fingers over the soft cover. When she opened it to the first page, her breath caught as she read his words. These are all the reasons, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. All the reasons you're amazing, Alexander finished. All the reasons I've fallen for you. Emily looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. The city lights cast a soft glow on her face, making her look ethereal. Alexander reached up, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. I know we both came into this with our own fears, he said softly. But I don't want to be afraid anymore either. I want to build something real with you, Emily. Something that lasts. Emily set the journal carefully aside, turning to face him fully. I want that too, she whispered. The music played softly in the background as they gazed at each other. Alexander's hand was still on her cheek, and Emily leaned into his touch. Slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, he leaned in. Their lips met in a soft, tender kiss. Emily's hand came up to rest on his chest, right over his heart. The world seemed to fade away until there was nothing but this moment, this connection between them. When they finally pulled apart, Emily's eyes were shining with joy instead of tears. Alexander rested his forehead against hers, both of them smiling, both knowing that this was just the beginning of their story. Alexander adjusted Emily's collar as they stood outside his parents' sprawling mansion. You look beautiful, he said, noticing how she fidgeted with the hem of her dress. They're going to love you. Are you sure? Emily whispered, her hands trembling slightly. What if they think I'm not? She trailed off, but Alexander knew what she meant. Hey. He tilted her chin up gently. You're everything to me, and they'll see exactly what I see. The front door opened before Emily could respond, revealing Alexander's mother, Catherine, an elegant woman with kind eyes and Alexander's warm smile. "You must be Emily," she exclaimed, stepping forward to embrace her. "We've heard so much about you." Emily relaxed slightly into the hug, surprised by the genuine warmth. "It's wonderful to meet you, Mrs. Harrison." "Oh, please, call me Catherine. Come in, both of you. James is in the living room." Alexander's father stood as they entered, his imposing height softened by the genuine smile on his face. "Emily," he greeted, extending his hand. "Welcome to our home." During dinner, Emily found herself gradually unwinding as conversation flowed naturally. Catherine asked about her work in graphic design, showing genuine interest in Emily's latest projects. James shared stories about Alexander's childhood, making everyone laugh with tales of his son's ambitious schemes. "Remember when you tried to start a neighborhood newspaper at age 10? Catherine chuckled. "You had the whole street involved." Alexander grinned. "That was my first business venture." "And just as successful as your current ones," James added proudly. "Though I must say, son, I've never seen you happier than you are now." Emily felt her cheeks warm as Alexander squeezed her hand under the table. "That's all Emily's doing," he said softly. After dinner, Catherine insisted on showing Emily the family photo albums, much to Alexander's mock horror. As they settled on the couch, Emily found herself drawn into the stories behind each picture, feeling increasingly part of this family's history rather than an outsider looking in. "Oh, this one." Catherine pointed to a photo of young Alexander in a superhero costume. "He wore this for weeks, insisted on saving everyone from everything." "Still trying to save the world, aren't you?" Emily smiled at Alexander, who was watching them with obvious joy. "Some things never change," he agreed. Later, as Catherine led Emily on a tour of their garden, she stopped by a beautiful rose bush. "You know," she said quietly, "I've never seen Alexander this content. He's always been driven, successful, but with you, he's found peace." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "He's changed my life," she admitted. "I never thought I could feel this accepted, this loved." Catherine took her hand. "Your family now, dear. Never doubt that." Inside, Alexander was having a similar conversation with his father. "She's wonderful, son," James said. "Real. That's rare to find." Just then, Alexander's phone buzzed. Looking down, he saw Victoria's name, his ex, flash across the screen. Without hesitation, he declined the call and blocked the number. "Victoria?" James asked, noting his son's expression. "Yes," Alexander replied firmly. "But she's the past. Emily is my future." A text message came through before the blocking took effect. "I miss you. Can't we talk?" Alexander typed a quick response. "I've moved on, Victoria. I'm happy now. Truly happy. Please respect that and don't contact me again." When Emily and Catherine returned from the garden, they found Alexander and James discussing plans for the upcoming holiday season. "You'll join us for Christmas, won't you, Emily?" Catherine asked hopefully. Emily looked at Alexander, who nodded encouragingly. "I'd love to," she replied, feeling a warmth spread through her chest at being included so naturally in their family plans. As they prepared to leave, both Catherine and James hugged Emily goodbye. "Come back soon," Catherine insisted. "We need someone to help us keep this one in line," she added, winking at her son. In the car, Emily leaned back against the seat, a content smile on her face. "Your parents are amazing," she said softly. "They adore you," Alexander replied, taking her hand as he drove. "Just like I do." The drive home from Alexander's parents' house was quiet, both of them lost in their thoughts. The streetlights cast intermittent shadows across Emily's face as she gazed out the window, her fingers still intertwined with Alexander's on the center console. When they arrived at Emily's apartment, Alexander turned off the engine but made no move to get out. Would you like to come up for some tea? Emily asked softly, recognizing the thoughtful expression on his face. Inside her cozy living room, Emily busied herself in the kitchen, while Alexander settled on the sofa. The familiar scent of chamomile filled the air as she returned with 2 steaming mugs. "You're quiet tonight," she observed, tucking her legs beneath her as she sat beside him. Alexander took a sip before setting his mug down. "I need to tell you something," he said, turning to face her. "Victoria tried to contact me again today." Emily's hand tightened around her mug, but she remained silent, waiting for him to continue. "I blocked her number," he said firmly, "but it made me realize something. I've been holding back parts of myself, afraid of being hurt again, and I see you doing the same thing." Emily set her mug down, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Sometimes I look at us and think it's too good to be true, that one day you'll wake up and realize I'm not—" "Stop," Alexander said gently, taking her hands in his. "Emily, you're everything I've ever wanted, but I need you to believe that too." Tears welled in Emily's eyes. "It's hard sometimes. When I see how successful you are, how beautiful your ex was, I can't help but compare myself." "You want to know what I see when I look at you?" Alexander's voice was soft but intense. "I see someone who lights up a room with her smile, someone who makes me laugh, who challenges me to be better. I see your strength, your kindness, your creativity, and yes, I see your beauty too. All of it, inside and out." Emily wiped at her tears. "I want to be better at this, at believing in us, in myself." "Then let's make a deal," Alexander said, shifting closer. "Complete honesty, no matter how scary it feels. No more hiding our insecurities or fears from each other." "Even when those fears seem silly?" Emily asked. "Especially then," Alexander smiled. "Like how I worry sometimes that I'm too focused on work, that I might not be giving you enough attention." Emily squeezed his hands. "You always make time for me, even when you're busy. That means everything. And you need to know that when I look at you, I see the woman I want to build a future with. Not because you're perfect, none of us are, but because you're perfectly imperfect. You're real, Emily. You make me feel safe to be real too." "I want that," Emily whispered. "To be real with you. To stop letting my fears hold me back." Alexander pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her. "Then let's promise each other something. No more hiding. No more letting our past hurts dictate our future. We face everything together, the good, the bad, and everything in between." Emily nestled into his embrace, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek. "Together," she agreed. "Even when it's scary?" "Especially then," Alexander said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Your insecurities, my workaholic tendencies, whatever comes our way, we'll figure it out together." "I like the sound of that," Emily smiled, looking up at him. "Being together, being real." "Me too," Alexander said softly. "Because that's what love is supposed to be. Accepting each other completely, supporting each other always." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the weight of their promises settling around them like a warm blanket. Emily felt something shift inside her, a quiet certainty taking root where doubt had lived for so long. "I promise to always be honest with you," she said, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her words. "To trust in us, even when my fears try to tell me otherwise." "And I promise to always show you how much you mean to me," Alexander replied. "To never let you doubt your worth or your place in my life." Emily watched the landscape roll by through the passenger window, her curiosity growing with each mile. Alexander had been mysteriously tight-lipped about their weekend destination, offering only a cryptic smile when she'd asked where they were headed. "Almost there," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. The city had given way to winding country roads, bordered by tall pines and glimpses of sparkling water through the trees. As they rounded a final curve, a charming lakeside cabin came into view. Emily's eyes widened as she took in the wraparound porch, the weathered wood exterior, and the pristine lake stretching out behind it. "Alexander, this is beautiful," she breathed, drinking in the peaceful scene. He parked the car and turned to her with a soft smile. "I thought we could use some time away from everything. Just us." Inside, the cabin was cozy but elegant, with large windows overlooking the water. Emily ran her hand along the smooth kitchen counter while Alexander brought in their bags. "How did you find this place?" she asked, wandering into the living room where a stone fireplace dominated one wall. "I used to come here to think when things got overwhelming at work," he admitted. "It's always helped me clear my head, gain perspective. I wanted to share it with you." They spent the afternoon exploring the property, walking hand in hand along the shore. The late summer sun warmed their skin as they collected smooth stones and watched birds dive for fish in the crystal-clear water. As evening approached, Alexander led Emily to a wooden dock extending into the lake. He'd set up comfortable chairs and a small table with wine and cheese. "This feels like a dream," Emily said, settling into her chair. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, its reflection dancing across the water's surface. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," Alexander said, pouring them each a glass of wine. "About us, about the future." Emily's heart quickened. "Me too," she admitted. "Sometimes I catch myself planning ahead, imagining what our life could be like, and then I worry I'm getting ahead of myself." "Tell me," Alexander encouraged, leaning forward. "What do you imagine?" Emily took a sip of wine, gathering her courage. "I imagine more moments like this. Quiet times together, away from the pressure of work and society. I imagine building a home together, maybe starting a family someday." She paused, watching his reaction carefully. "But I still worry sometimes that I'm not enough, that you'll want someone more." "Emily," Alexander interrupted gently, "look around. This place, it's special to me. Sacred, even. I've never brought anyone else here because no one else has meant what you mean to me." The water lapped softly against the dock posts as Emily absorbed his words. "What do you imagine?" she asked quietly. "I imagine waking up next to you every morning," he said, his voice full of emotion. "I imagine building a life with someone who sees the real me, not just the successful businessman everyone else sees. I imagine facing all of life's challenges with you by my side." Emily felt tears welling in her eyes. "Even the hard parts?" "Especially those," Alexander smiled, reaching for her hand. "You've taught me that being vulnerable isn't weakness. It's strength, it's trust." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky. A cool breeze rippled across the lake, carrying the scent of pine and water. "What scares you most about the future?" Emily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Alexander considered the question carefully. "Losing sight of what really matters. Getting so caught up in success and achievement that I forget to cherish the simple moments, the real connections." He turned to her. "What about you?" "Not being enough," Emily admitted. "Not for you, not for myself. I'm learning to believe in us, in myself, but sometimes those old fears creep back in." "Then we'll keep reminding each other," Alexander said firmly. "Every day if we have to. Because you are more than enough, Emily. You're everything." They continued talking as stars began appearing in the darkening sky, sharing their hopes, their fears, and their dreams for the future they wanted to build together. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton sparkled with crystal chandeliers and elegant decorations. Emily stood before the full-length mirror in the ladies' powder room, smoothing down her midnight blue evening gown. The dress hugged her curves perfectly, and for the first time in her life, she smiled at her reflection without a hint of self-doubt. "You look stunning," Alexander said as she emerged, his eyes lighting up at the sight of her. He stood tall in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, offering his arm. "Thank you," Emily replied, no longer deflecting compliments as she had months ago. She took his arm, feeling the warmth of his presence beside her. The annual charity gala was in full swing, with hundreds of Seattle's elite mingling among tables decorated with elaborate floral centerpieces. This was the same type of event where they'd first started to connect, but everything felt different now. Emily no longer felt like an outsider looking in. "Mrs. Henderson was just asking about your latest art exhibition," Alexander said as they made their way through the crowd. "She's quite impressed with your work." Emily beamed, remembering how she'd finally gathered the courage to showcase her paintings 3 months ago. Alexander had been there every step of the way, encouraging her to share her talent with the world. They stopped to chat with various guests, and Emily found herself engaging in conversations with confidence she never knew she possessed. Gone was the woman who would have hidden in corners, making herself invisible. In her place stood someone who knew her worth wasn't determined by others' judgments. "Would you like to dance?" Alexander asked, extending his hand as the orchestra began playing a slow waltz. Emily took his hand without hesitation, letting him lead her to the dance floor. As they swayed to the music, she caught glimpses of their reflection in the ballroom's mirrors. They moved together perfectly, like they'd been dancing all their lives. "Do you remember that first night in the parking lot?" Emily asked softly. Alexander's hand tightened slightly on her waist. "How could I forget? You were trying so hard to disappear, and all I wanted was to make you see how special you were. I was so sure you'd judge me," she admitted, "that you'd see my size and dismiss me like everyone else had. And I was terrified of letting anyone close after what happened with Rebecca," he replied, referring to his ex. "But something about your vulnerability that night broke through all my walls." They continued dancing, lost in their memories. The past months hadn't been without challenges. There had been moments of doubt, times when old insecurities threatened to resurface. But they'd faced each obstacle together, growing stronger with every challenge overcome. "Alexander," Emily said, looking up at him, "thank you for not giving up on me, even when I tried to push you away." He pulled her closer, their steps never faltering. "Thank you for showing me what real love looks like. Not the superficial kind I thought I needed, but something deeper, more meaningful." Around them, other couples danced. Camera flashes occasionally lit up the room, and the sounds of laughter and conversation filled the air. But in their small bubble on the dance floor, it was just the two of them, celebrating how far they'd come. "You know what makes me happiest?" Emily asked, her eyes shining. "What's that?" "That we both had to learn to love ourselves before we could truly love each other. All those fears and insecurities we had, they didn't just magically disappear. We worked through them together." Alexander nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "And we're stronger for it. Every doubt we overcame, every moment of vulnerability we shared, it all led us here." The music shifted to another song, but they kept dancing, neither wanting to break the moment. Emily rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, feeling completely at peace. This was what real love felt like. Not a fairy tale ending, but a deep, abiding connection built on trust, understanding, and mutual growth. They had both changed so much since that first encounter in the parking lot, yet their core connection remained the same. Every challenge they'd faced had only served to strengthen their bond, proving that their love was worth fighting for.